We've all met someone like this, charming on the surface, innocent in tone, helpful in appearance, but something in us whispers that something is off. We dismiss it. We tell ourselves we're imagining things. But days, weeks, or months later, we look back and realize we've been played. Not with force, but with finesse. Not with threats, but with smiles. Welcome to the mind of the manipulator. And if we don't learn to see the signs, we will continue to be pawns in games we don't even know we're playing.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Machiavelli didn't just study power, he studied deception. He understood that the most dangerous enemy is not the one who attacks you openly, but the one who makes you believe they're on your side. Manipulative people don't look like villains. They often look like allies, mentors, even friends. They know how to mirror your values, echo your pain, and earn your trust. And once that trust is secured, they slowly bend your will to fit their hidden agenda. One of the first signs of manipulation is subtle guilt. You'll notice that you start doing things not because you want to, but because you feel like you owe them. A manipulator will make small sacrifices, calculated ones, and remind you of them later when they need something. After everything I've done for you, it sounds generous, but it's transactional. Real kindness doesn't keep a scoreboard. Manipulative kindness always comes with a receipt. Another red flag is the weaponization of your empathy. They'll share stories that trigger your compassion, often exaggerated or strategically timed. They know if they appear broken, you'll lower your guard. They use pain as currency, not to heal, but to control. Machiavelli would call this emotional leverage a tool used to keep you disarmed and obedient. If someone's pain always demands your sacrifice and never leads to their own growth, you're not in a relationship. You're in a trap. Manipulative people also thrive on ambiguity. They speak in vague terms, never giving you full clarity. They avoid direct answers, and when cornered, they say, "You misunderstood me." They never own their words, because their power lies in the gray area. Ambiguity allows them to shift the narrative at will. When things go wrong, they'll act surprised. "That's not what I meant. You're being too sensitive." They turn your confusion into self-doubt, and your self-doubt into compliance. One of the most dangerous strategies manipulators use is playing the victim when they are the aggressor. They hurt you, but when you confront them, they cry louder than you. They twist the story so that your pain becomes an attack on them. And suddenly you're apologizing for even bringing it up. This is not just gaslighting, it's identity theft. They steal your role in the story and rewrite it to suit their needs. And if you're not grounded in truth, you'll get lost in their fiction. Pay close attention to how your body feels around certain people. The body doesn't lie. If you feel drained after every interaction, anxious before you meet them, or guilty for setting boundaries, you're likely being manipulated. The mind can be fooled, but the nervous system remembers. Manipulators operate in the mental realm, where words can be twisted, but your body holds the truth. Learn to trust it. Machiavelli believed that manipulation was not a flaw, it was a feature of power. He didn't condemn it, he exposed it. He knew that manipulators often rise to the top, not because they are the best, but because they are the most adaptable. They can wear any mask, speak any language, and fit into any role. But behind all the masks is the same hunger, control. And if you don't recognize the signs, you will be controlled. Another key sign of manipulation is artificial urgency. We need to decide now. You can't wait on this. They push you to act before you have time to think, because thinking is dangerous to them. When you pause, you see. When you reflect, you realize. So they rush you. They flood you with emotion, urgency, and pressure, because those are the enemies of clarity. The more urgent the decision feels, the more likely it's being manipulated. Manipulators also isolate you, but not always physically. They isolate your thoughts. They make you question your instincts. They subtly criticize the people you trust, planting seeds of doubt. Are you sure they really have your back? I just want what's best for you. They pose as protectors while cutting your lifelines. Eventually, you find yourself alone, not in the world, but in your mind. And that's where they gain full control. Let's ask a deeper question. Why do we fall for manipulation in the first place? The answer lies in our own psychology. Most of us want to be seen, understood, and validated. Manipulators study that desire. They mirror your values, your language, your wounds. They become what you want to see, and in doing so, they bypass your defenses. You don't question them because they feel familiar. But familiarity is not always truth. Sometimes it's a mask tailored just for you. Another tactic manipulators use is selective kindness. They give just enough to keep you hopeful, but not enough to feel secure. It's emotional starvation. You keep trying harder, hoping for more consistency, but the reward is always just out of reach. This creates psychological addiction. They become the source of your highs and lows. And like any addict, you begin to crave the very thing that's hurting you. It's a cycle, and breaking it requires brutal honesty. Machiavelli would advise us not just to spot manipulation in others, but to examine it within ourselves. Where do we manipulate under the guise of protection? Where do we use guilt, silence, or praise to control outcomes? We are not exempt from the game just because we see it. The wise don't just study others, they study themselves. And the most dangerous manipulations are the ones we justify in the name of love, justice, or truth. Manipulators often use comparison to destabilize you. Why can't you be more like them? They would never treat me this way. This creates insecurity. You begin to compete for their approval. But the game is rigged. They will always move the goalpost. Because the goal is not growth, it's control. When someone constantly makes you feel like you're not enough, they are not helping you improve. They are breaking you down to make you easier to mold. Sometimes manipulation is wrapped in flattery. It sounds like admiration, but it's loaded with expectation. You're the only one I trust. No one gets me like you. These words feel good, but they carry weight. You now feel responsible for their emotions, their decisions, even their healing. And when you fail to meet that impossible standard, they don't get angry, they get wounded. And you feel like the villain. That's how they trap you in a cycle of guilt and performance. So what's the solution? Awareness. You must train your mind to see beyond the surface. You must learn to pause before reacting. To ask, what is this person really asking of me? What do they gain from my compliance? How do I feel after interacting with them? These questions are your sword and shield. They cut through the fog. They protect your energy. You must also learn to sit with discomfort. Manipulators count on your desire to resolve tension quickly. That's why they use silence, guilt trips, or emotional chaos to make you react. But if you can stay grounded, if you can hold your center, they lose their leverage. Power is not in always knowing what to do. Sometimes it's in staying still long enough to see the truth. The world is not short on manipulators, but it's also not short on wisdom. You don't need to become paranoid. You need to become precise. Study patterns, observe actions, listen deeply. Not just to what is said, but to what is hidden. Truth is always present, but it's often buried beneath charm, urgency, and performance. And so we return to the original question: how do we protect ourselves from manipulation? We must know ourselves so deeply that no one can use our desires against us. We must love ourselves so fully that we don't need external approval to feel whole. We must trust ourselves so fiercely that even the smoothest lie cannot move us. That is power. That is what Machiavelli would call true sovereignty. If you're still watching, it means you've already sensed the presence of manipulation in your life. Maybe in subtle moments, maybe in explosions, maybe in someone close to you who always leaves you a little more confused than when the conversation began. That's not accidental. Manipulators don't want you to understand clearly. They want you to feel something: guilt, fear, obligation, uncertainty, but not clarity. Because clarity leads to autonomy, and autonomy threatens their control. Machiavelli understood that manipulation was an art form. He admired it not morally, but strategically. He saw how those who mastered it could rise through social ranks, win influence, and hold power without ever lifting a sword. And that's what makes it so dangerous. The manipulator doesn't attack from the front. They get behind your defenses and pull strings from within. And unless we sharpen our awareness, we become puppets believing the emotions we feel are our own, when in fact, they've been implanted. One of the most overlooked signs of a manipulator is their obsession with perception. They care more about how they appear than who they truly are. They're often obsessed with reputation, with appearing humble, generous, wise, or selfless. But these traits are worn like costumes. They are carefully curated masks, used to disarm those around them. You'll find they are different with different people. They mirror environments. They read the room with surgical precision. And they present the version of themselves that will most effectively influence the audience. This is why many manipulators rise to positions of influence. They're not always loud or aggressive. Many are soft-spoken, polite, and helpful. They gain trust by appearing trustworthy. But underneath, everything is transactional. Every compliment is currency. Every favor is a deposit. And one day they will collect. They will say, "After all I've done for you," and in that moment, you'll realize none of it was unconditional. A master manipulator never plays just one game. They play multiple games at once. They'll make you feel special, like you're the only one who understands them. But in the background, they're saying the same thing to someone else. This creates triangulation, a psychological tactic where you're subtly pitted against others. You begin to compete for their attention, their approval, and the manipulator becomes the prize. You fight for them, even though they're the one creating the conflict. Manipulators also use silence as a weapon. Not peaceful silence, but strategic silence. The kind that makes you feel like something's wrong, though nothing is said. They withdraw affection, attention, or communication and wait for you to react. You'll find yourself apologizing, even though you're not sure what you did wrong. That's the point. They want to keep you off balance. They want you to seek their approval, on their terms, again and again. Machiavelli would call this psychological warfare. He wouldn't tell you to cry about it. He'd tell you to study it, to learn the enemy's tactics, to become so aware that manipulation bounces off your armor. And that armor is made of self-knowledge. When you know who you are, no one can tell you who to be. When you know your values, no one can guilt you into violating them. And when you know your weakness, no one can use it against you. Let's talk about gaslighting, one of the most insidious tools in manipulation. It's not just lying. It's making you question your own reality. You say something hurt you, they say. You're too sensitive. You remember an event, they say, that never happened. You bring up a boundary, they say. You're being dramatic. Over time, you begin to doubt your own memory, your own judgments, your own sanity. And once you doubt yourself, you become easy to control. Gaslighting isn't always direct. Sometimes it's subtle. A raised eyebrow, a sigh, a smile that says, "You're being ridiculous," without saying a word. These micro signals are powerful. They make you shrink. They make you second guess. And that's exactly what the manipulator wants. Because when you stop trusting your inner compass, you surrender to theirs. How do we resist? First, we must reclaim our perception, write things down, document conversations, keep a journal. Not to obsess, but to anchor yourself in reality. Manipulators thrive in fog, so you must become the light. You must stay grounded in your truth, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's challenged. Especially when it's challenged. The next tactic manipulators love is forced dependency. They offer help, support, even rescue, but it's not out of love. It's out of strategy. They create a dynamic where you need them, where your success, safety, or emotional well-being seems to rely on their presence. And as soon as you try to stand alone, they remind you of everything they've done for you. They don't want you to grow. They want you to orbit around them. This dynamic is especially dangerous in relationships, romantic, professional, or familial, because it feels like love. It looks like support. But it's control wrapped in care, and when you try to leave, they don't scream. They whisper. They say, "You'll never find someone who understands you like I do. You'll fail without me. You're not ready." These aren't warnings. They're chains. Here's a question. What part of you needs to be needed? Because sometimes we stay in manipulative relationships not because we're weak, but because we get something from it. A sense of purpose, a sense of identity, even a sense of superiority. They need me. But if your value comes from being indispensable to someone who controls you, that's not purpose. That's dependence, and it will drain you until there's nothing left. Machiavelli would remind us, power is only real if it is chosen. If you're only strong when someone else is weak, that's not strength. That's imbalance. And manipulators love imbalance. They love to keep you one step beneath them. Not enough to break, but just enough to stay chasing. Chasing clarity, chasing peace, chasing their approval. But you'll never catch it because they're always moving the target. Let's talk about control through chaos. Some manipulators create confusion to gain power. They change plans last minute. They contradict themselves. They keep you guessing. This isn't carelessness. It's a tactic. When nothing is stable, they become the only stable point. And you begin to rely on them, even as they are the ones creating the instability. It's a loop, and many people live in it for years. You must learn to detect this pattern. Look for inconsistency. Look for people who create drama and then offer to fix it. That's the cycle. They destabilize, then rescue. They injure, then comfort. And you become trauma bonded not because they're good, but because they become your relief from the very pain they cause. You must also watch for the false future. Manipulators are masters of potential. They talk about what could be. We'll start that project soon. I'll change. Once things settle down, I'll show up more. But it never happens. They dangle hope like a carrot, just far enough to keep you moving. But the future they sell is a fantasy. And every day you chase it is a day lost to illusion. So what is the antidote to manipulation? Clarity, boundaries, and the willingness to walk away. You must be more loyal to your peace than to their potential. You must be willing to lose people to find yourself. And that takes courage. A kind of inner toughness that doesn't scream but doesn't bend either. You don't need to confront every manipulator. Sometimes the most powerful move is not to argue, but to exit. Not to explain, but to observe. And when you stop reacting, they lose their grip. Because manipulation only works when you participate. When you feed the game. When you play the role they've written for you. So ask yourself, what role have you been playing in someone else's script? And are you ready to walk off that stage? Now we enter the final and most transformative phase of this journey, not just in recognizing manipulation, but in breaking its spell and reclaiming control over your own mind, your emotions, and choices. If you've come this far, it means you're not just curious about manipulation, you've likely lived through it. You felt the confusion, the guilt, the mental fog. But more importantly, you're ready to see through it. And once you see it, you can never be blind again. Here's the most brutal truth. Manipulative people don't always know they're being manipulative. Some do, yes, they're calculated, strategic, even sociopathic in their control. But others were raised in environments where manipulation was love, where guilt was affection, where control was safety. And so they repeat those patterns not out of malice, but out of habit. That doesn't make it okay, but it does make it more complex. And it means that breaking free requires not just awareness of them, but awareness of ourselves. Ask yourself, where in your life have you tolerated manipulation in the name of peace? Where have you silenced yourself to keep the relationship intact? Where have you accepted emotional tension as normal? These are difficult questions, but they're necessary. Because until we stop romanticizing pain, we will keep calling abuse intensity and control concern, and dependency destiny. Machiavelli would advise us to observe patterns, not promises. Manipulative people often make grand declarations. They say what you want to hear. They apologize with poetic sincerity. They explain their behavior with tearful stories. But the pattern always returns. The cycle begins again. The real measure of someone is not what they say when confronted, it's what they do after. And if their behavior doesn't change, their apologies mean nothing. Another sign of manipulation is constant repositioning. The manipulator is always the hero or the victim, never the villain. If they hurt you, it's because they were trying to help. If they lie, it's because you couldn't handle the truth. If they sabotage, it's because they cared too much. They rewrite reality in real time to protect their image. And if you're not anchored in your own truth, you'll get swept up in theirs. At this point, you may wonder, why do manipulative people fear honest conversation? Because honesty strips away their tools. It takes away confusion. It brings light into the shadows. When you start asking direct questions, what did you mean by that? Why did you say this here but that there? You break the spell. They become exposed. And exposure is what they fear most, because their power thrives in secrecy. You must also be aware of the manipulator's favorite disguise, the peacemaker. Not all manipulators are aggressive. Some are soft, passive, and always just trying to help. But their help always has strings. Their peace always has a price. They want you to stay calm, but only because your anger threatens their control. They want harmony, but only if it means silence. This is not peace. It's suppression dressed in politeness. Let's talk about boundaries. A manipulator's greatest enemy is a clear boundary, because boundaries cannot be twisted. They're not emotional, not debatable. They are simple, direct, and firm. When you say, "I'm not available for that," or "that doesn't work for me," the manipulator has no script. They will test it, guilt you, mock you, or escalate, but if you hold the line, they lose leverage. And if they leave because of your boundary, that's not a loss. That's liberation. But holding boundaries is hard, especially when the manipulator is someone you love, or a parent, a partner, a friend. You want to believe in their better nature. You want to hold space for their wounds. And that's noble, but only if it doesn't cost your sanity. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-sacrifice. And you are not here to be consumed by someone else's healing. One of the hardest truths to face is this: some people benefit from you staying small. They benefit from your silence, your compliance, your self-doubt. Because the moment you step into clarity, they lose their edge. So they'll distract you with drama, with guilt, with false praise. They'll do anything to keep you from waking up. But once you do, their power evaporates. Because their power was never real. It was borrowed from your confusion. So how do we make this shift? How do we move from being controlled to being conscious? First, we must stop arguing with manipulators. Their goal is not clarity, it's control. They want to keep you entangled in emotional loops, so don't defend or explain. Just observe. Let your actions be your boundaries. Let your silence be your answer. Let your clarity terrify them. Next, we must rebuild our inner compass. Manipulation works best on those who don't trust themselves. So ask, where did you learn to doubt your instincts? Who taught you that your truth was too much? Your anger was wrong. Your needs were selfish. You go back to the root. Heal there. Because once you trust your perception again, you become unshakable. You stop needing validation. You stop chasing approval. You stand. Machiavelli would say that the wisest strategy is to appear calm while seeing everything. Not paranoid, but aware. You don't need to react to every move. You just need to see it for what it is. Manipulative people rely on being unseen. So when you become the mirror, they either face themselves or flee. Either way, you win. Here's a deeper question. What happens when you've been the manipulator? It's not easy to admit, but we've all used guilt, silence, charm, or fear to shape outcomes. Sometimes it's unconscious. Sometimes it's survival. But the point is not to feel shame, it's to feel responsibility. Because when we clean our side of the street, we become immune to the games of others. We can't be manipulated by tactics we no longer use. So what does life look like after manipulation? It looks like clarity, like peace that doesn't require performance, like relationships built on truth, not tension. It looks like choosing people who don't need to control you to love you. It looks like becoming someone who doesn't need to control to feel loved. That's the shift. That's the revolution. You will start to notice how quiet life becomes when manipulation leaves the room. There's no more decoding. No more walking on eggshells. No more second-guessing your every word. Just truth, directness, simplicity. And that might feel unfamiliar at first, even boring. But that's because you were addicted to emotional chaos. And healing often feels dull compared to drama until you realize that peace is the most powerful drug of all. So where do we go from here? We become students of human behavior. We study motives. We listen not just to words, but to energy. We observe patterns, not promises. We stay grounded in our own values, even when others try to pull us away. We learn to walk alone when needed, and we learn to walk away when necessary. We stop trying to rescue people who enjoy drowning. We stop explaining ourselves to people who are committed to misunderstanding us. We stop giving access to those who only show up to control. And in doing so, we reclaim something that was never theirs to begin with: our power. Manipulative people have these signs. And now you've seen them. You've felt them. You've named them. The question is, what will you do with that awareness? Will you go back to sleep? Or will you build a life where manipulation cannot survive? The choice is yours. The clarity is yours. The freedom is yours. And no one, no matter how charming, broken, or persuasive, gets to take that from you ever again.